welcome to another edition of Tuscaloosa Talks. We've been doing this now for a couple of years, but I have to say this may be one of the most exciting Tuscaloosa Talks we've ever done, and we're going to run probably a little bit longer because it's important. We're celebrating Juneteenth today, but it's important we recognize our history here in Tuscaloosa, especially our civil rights history. And I'm joined by two legends of Tuscaloosa, and in particular, legends when it comes to promoting civil rights for all in Tuscaloosa. So Maxie Thomas, Danny Steele, thank you very much for joining us here on Tuscaloosa Talks. Let's jump right in. I want to first talk about T.Y. Rogers, a confidant of Dr. Martin Luther King. In fact, Maxie, you and I were talking earlier, and the picture will show in the video. This came from an article in Patch from last year, and it shows a picture of Dr. Martin Luther King at the convocation of T.Y. Rogers. Where were you that day in the church?
I was right in that corner right there.
What was it like to hear Dr. Martin Luther King speak almost a year after the I Have a Dream speech, and just a couple of months before June 9th, 1964, Bloody Tuesday in Tuscaloosa?
Yeah, it was exciting because he focused on human rights, and my reflection is that we were not treated fairly or equally in Tuscaloosa at that time, and he had that glimmer of hope that we could elevate ourselves and be better at what we do. And he focused on changing things. And based on the things that I had to go through, it was a welcoming speech because it focused on some of the things that I was very concerned about.
Now, Mr. Steele, you and I were talking earlier that you weren't even aware that day that Dr. Martin Luther King was speaking.
Correct.
So how did you find yourself was it the Tuscaloosa
Citizens for Action Committee?
How did you weave yourself into getting active in that?
Well, if we can go back to that picture.
Absolutely.
The way that picture came into being, Dr. Scott Bridges and I were discussing Bloody Tuesday, and I told him there was a gentleman I wanted him to meet, Mr. Edward Jenkins, who was a photographer. Almost every black person in Tuscaloosa, Mr. Jenkins, took their pictures. So I took Dr. Bridges over to Mr. Jenkins' house. So while we were talking about Bloody Tuesday, his wife said, "I think I have something that you guys need." So she walked out of the room, came back, and had that picture. So Mr. Jenkins is the one that actually took that picture.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Now, that particular day, no, I was not there, but I was present for Bloody Tuesday.
So what was the connection between Pastor Rogers and Dr. Martin Luther King? Because in reading the history of his appointment here in Tuscaloosa, it was actually an appointment that Dr. King encouraged. What was the history between the two?
Reverend Rogers was the associate pastor for Dr. King in Montgomery. However, he had received a pastoralship up in Pennsylvania, I think it was, in that area. And when First African Baptists needed, they were looking for a new minister. And at that point, that's when Dr. King recommended Reverend Rogers to be the pastor at First African Baptist Church. We actually have documentations where the letter where Dr. King wrote and recommended that Reverend Rogers be the pastor of the church. So we have copies of the letter.
That history is amazing. And I asked both of you earlier when we were talking, and let's switch gears to June 9th, 1964, because I asked you both earlier, did you know you were part of history? But I think it's important, before I ask you to answer that question, we talk about Bloody Tuesday. Most people in Tuscaloosa still don't know the significance of Bloody Tuesday. Maxie, Describe why Bloody Tuesday happened. What were the events that led up to that fateful day in Tuscaloosa that we're going to talk about in a second? But what led up to Bloody Tuesday on June 9th, 1964?
Well, it was some promises made to, well, basically to black people, that when the new courthouse, county courthouse, is completed, that they will have no black restroom, no black water fountain. But when it opened up, we found out they had separate restroom and separate water fountain. And that was a promise that the official had made to the Tuscaloosa Citizens for Action in the black community.
And so that really set off the chain of events that led to June 9th.
Right.
Did the day of June 9th, I'll start with you, Danny, then I'll come back. I'm sorry, Mr. Steele. But what led you to show up at First African Baptist Church that morning?
Well, there were events preceding June 9th. We had been demonstrating prior to that. The businesses downtown had no blacks in key positions. There were restaurants, Woolworth and Crest, that had food bars in the back. We could go in and buy merchandise, but we could not eat food. At the McDonald's and Dairy Queen, we had to go to a side door. We couldn't go inside the building. And as Maxie said, the water fountains you had white and colored, so we couldn't drink out of white. But me being a young guy with my friends, we would go turn both of the fountains on that same time and see if that was, excuse me, and see if that was a difference in the water. You know, we just having fun, but we were getting our point across. The water was the same. So Tuscaloosa was very segregated. Giving an example, Charles and I were raised right on the corner of 10th Street and 2nd Avenue. And that's right across the street from where the baseball field is. It's in the same location. Our house was directly across from that baseball field. We could look at the baseball game, but we could not go to the baseball game because we were black. And every now and then when the game was going on and the ball coming out of our yard, then one of the players was used the N-word and said, "Little N, throw me that ball." I didn't know any better at that time. I just get the ball, throw it back to him. But that area, from Druid City Hospital up to where Capstone is now, that was a black neighborhood. You had doctors, lawyers, teachers. A lot of teachers came out of there. It was called Jackson Avenue, Castle Hill, Daily Bottom. And lastly, and I'm going to let Maxie talk.
No.
Okay. We had an area, now Maxie would know more about this than me. We had an area downtown on 23rd Street that was called Blue Front. And Blue Front was where most of your black businesses were located. You had doctors, medical doctors, dentists, lawyers.
Was this area the old Diamond Theater?
Where Diamond was a part of it.
Okay.
Yeah, the Diamond was, matter of fact, it ended right next to the Diamond. That was the Diamond movie theater. Then you had the Diamond drugstore, which was like a restaurant and a drugstore. And they only served black, but it was owned by white men, the movie theater and the drugstore. I think it was owned by Snow Hinton, Mayor Snow Hinton.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that entire area was known as Blue Front and black businesses. So what has happened now? The churches have come in and demolished most of those businesses.
So this was really what happened at the courthouse was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yes.
So Maxie, what inspired you to show up that morning on June 9th, 1964?
Let me kind of move it back just a little bit. What happened was, on a Monday night, we always had a mass meeting. And on a on Monday, Dick Gregory was the speaker for the night.
Really?
Yeah, and he really electrified the crowd, and from what he said, inspired me to really join the army we had called our Freedom Fighters Army.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to get too far off in the aspects of the army, but what Dick Gregory said that night, and after the speech, me and my brother and my cousin, James Young and Reverend Joe Taylor, and several more went down to talk to Dick Gregory and tell him what a great job he was doing, and me and my big mouth, I'm running off at the mouth. He looked at me and he said, "Let me tell you one thing." He said, "In a few minutes, I'm going to leave here. I'm going to catch the plane in Birmingham, and I'm going back to Chicago. It is not what I've done or what I'm going to do. The question is, what are you going to do when I leave?" At that point, I was committed that I was going to make it better for me, my children, and my children's children. That what brought me there that day.
So June 9th, 1964.
Right.
We're going to have the march is going to be from the First African Baptist Church
To the courthouse.
to the courthouse. The morning that both of you came to the church, did you know there'd be violence?
No. As Max has stated, we met every Monday night. It's called mass meeting, and this is where we got our instructions. This is how they told us how to demonstrate. We were taught how to march, how to protest, and how to protect the females. We had been demonstrating prior to June 9th, but for some reason on June 9th, Chief Marber did not give us a permit to march. We had to have a permit to march.
Mm-hmm.
So our instructions that day, were, we're going downtown, we're going to march, we're going to the courthouse. So some people went to the courthouse and some attempted to go down to the stores and desegregate the stores. But now on Monday night, this church was completely surrounded with, they call them the deacons, I can't remember, but the deacons were armed. They were protecting Reverend T.Y. Rogers. And even at his home, the home had to be protected because the Klan was constantly saying they were going to attack the church and attack Reverend Rogers. So the deacons took care of him. Reverend Rogers if you heard him speak, it was almost sound just like Martin Luther King. He had the same voice, same mannerism, and he would motivate you. People ask me, so were you afraid? No, I was not afraid. I was concerned, but not afraid. But what motivated us before we demonstrated, we would hear an inspirational message, and then we would sing freedom songs, and that would get us pumped up. We were ready to go. The main one is, ain't gonna let nobody turn me around.
Uh-huh.
I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up the freedom land. At that time, George Wallace was the governor, so we were we ain't gonna let George Wallace turn us around. We're gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land.
And George Wallace is the one who came actually to the courthouse to help cut the ribbon on it.
Right, absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Which certainly set in motion, helped again to set in motion a lot of Alabama's civil rights history.
Right.
Overall.
Yes.
let's talk about June 9th, 1964. I read a quote from former Council President Harrison Taylor that said, after T.Y. Rogers spoke that morning, he had to walk through alligators that had been outside. Mr. Thomas, that's a picture of you after the march. And it looks like you certainly bore the brunt of the brutality of that day. Describe to people what it was like when T.Y. Rogers finished his sermon, and then y'all began to exit the church and begin your march. What happened?
Okay, on that day, at that point in my life, my wife had died, and we had 3 children, and my mother and I got together, and we were raising my 3 children. But I was so dedicated to make a change until that morning when I left home. I didn't tell her where I was going. I just left. And when I got to the church, then we sit down and we had prayer. Just before we had prayer, that was just before we were marched out of the church. Just before we had prayer, I was sitting there and I saw the gravity of the situation. I mean, it was white males with billy club, baseball bat, whatever.
Citizens had been deputized, so to speak.
Right. So I sit there and I was thinking, I didn't tell my mother where I was going, and now I'm sitting here and I reflect on what's going to happen to my children. And at that fateful day, I prayed. When they had prayer, I prayed. I prayed hard because I had a lot to lose, because my children, their mother's gone, and I'm putting their whole future on the line. So that day, we marched out of church. And when Reverend Rogers got to the bottom step, they put him under arrest. But our orders were to go to the county courthouse, drink out the white fountain, and go to the white restroom. So when they arrested Reverend Rogers, we kept walking. And we got out of the church and I got almost to the funeral home. And I heard a voice in the audience said, "Get them niggas." And they charged us. And we were told that if we have a female with them, take her down and cover her up the best you can. And the lady that was on my left, she didn't go down fast enough. And by the time she got down, I saw the clerk coming, and it hit me right there. And he just peeled all that up. I kind of came through, and I heard one say, "Give me one in here." And I saw the tear gas canister when it hit the stained glass windows on the church. In fact, I saw 2 of them. After that, they took me, put me in the paddy wagon, and took me downtown. On the way downtown, they had arrested some female. And I was bleeding bad. And one of the young ladies that was in the paddy wagon, name was Dorothy Turner. And she got, I'm thinking that she got her blouse or something from somewhere and made a tourniquet to stop the bleeding. And by the time we got to the city jail, then the females went one way, the males went the other. And by the time they got me up on the second floor of the jail, I started bleeding again. And there was some male that was already had been arrested. They was already in jail. And a couple of them, Jimmy Ike, Mose Lacey, Joe Bonner, they saw how bad I was bleeding, so they insist that the policeman get me to medical head, and they just start tearing up the place. So the guy took me out, took me downstairs and put me in the police car, and it wasn't far from the jail.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we went through an alley because I could hear the rocks hitting the bottom of the car. We went in the back door of the doctor's office. And I could hear the doctor up front. He was using some very, very colorful language. Couple seconds, he kicked the door off. And he walked up to me and said, "Nigga, if you were Martin Luther King, I would throw your whole blank eye up." He grabbed it with no anesthetic lock and started sewing. He sewed it up and told the policeman to get this nigga out of my office. And that's what happened that day. But let me say this. I wasn't the only person there. We had dedicated people there. They were there and laid their life on the line that we may make progress. We wasn't trying to hurt anybody. We wasn't trying to take over anything. We just wanted to be treated equally like all the rest of the human beings. And hats off to all the participants that were there that day. I wished I knew everyone's name, that I could really shake their hand, because we made a change. We made a change in the world, and certainly made a change in Tuscaloosa.
There's no doubt. To say I can't imagine is the understatement of this podcast. Mr. Steele, what was your experience that day?
You know, Max and I present this Bloody Tuesday quite often. So if you hear Maxie and then hear my presentation, you're going to think we were in two different places. So what happened to Maxie was basically on the outside of the church. What happened to me and my brother Charles was inside the church. We didn't actually make it out through the front door. But as Maxie said, we had prayer, and we would always sing, "We shall, we shall overcome," when we leave the church. And then once we get to the steps, we'll stop singing and hum. But this particular day, as we were coming down the aisle, it kind of, the flow of the traffic stopped, and then all of a sudden you heard glass breaking, you heard people screaming, and they were shooting the tear gas in at that point. I did not get hit by a billy club, but I felt the effects of the tear gas. Your eyes burning, your nose running, you can't breathe, your mouth is open, you're disoriented, you're going in circles, really. So my brother and I, Charles, were trying to get out of the church to come over to here, to the funeral home, because my dad was working here at that time. And
Did your dad know where you were?
no, they told me not to come. And the story behind that is my mother was a school teacher. So the superintendent at that time was Dr. Nelson. And he called her in because he had heard that I had been up to the church protesting. So he kind of like threatened her with a job. So on that particular morning, I lived in Brown Circle. My mother told me not to come up here. So all of my friends came, and that means I was here by myself. I mean, at home by myself. So I sneaked out of the house. I came up here. She sent Charles up here to get me. So when Charles got here, he got involved, but he was not involved in civil rights at all. So he tell everybody now that I'm the reason that he got into civil rights. But
Boy, he is.
he is.
Yeah, boy.
But as we were leaving, trying to get out of the church, we finally made it out, and there was a gentleman with us, James G. He had polio in one leg. We called him Tick. So there was a white deputized person had a billy club, and he said, "You niggas get back in that church." And Tick cursed him. So they forced Charles and myself back into the church. And between the funeral home and the church, they had Tick. They stretched him out. He was stretched out on the ground just like this. And that deputized person hit him in the mouth and knocked all his teeth out. In the parking lot where you park now in the back, those were houses back there. So a lot of people ran up under the houses for safety. In this article right here is showing where there was a flagman. You're probably too young to remember, but on 15th Street, they had a flagman that would stop the cars so the trains could come by. Oh. So there was a flagman that tried to capture some of the blacks for the police, and he was not paying attention to what he was doing. And he got both his legs amputated. The train came by and cut his legs off. So my story and Maxie's story are entirely different based on the inside. But as far as the movement itself, every Monday night it was fired up, it was packed, everybody had energy, and it was nonviolent. And our only goal was to be treated equal here in Tuscaloosa.
Well, as we wrap up, and I wish we had even more time. As we wrap up, there's a movement across this country to almost eliminate history, or to try to, revise it. Why is it important that people of Tuscaloosa understand our civil rights movement, and in particular, what the two of you experienced on June 9th, 1964, 59 years ago, plus? Mr. Thomas, I'll start with you.
Well, it's very important that we have to realize it, and the power that be. We have to realize that all of us are members of the human family, be he wherever. And we shouldn't treat people like they are subhuman. We as black was not even considered as human beings. We was property, or like an animal that you slaughter. And they killed a lot of black people. But it is important, the most important thing is, we got to come together as a world and realize that we all are members of the human family. And we have to realize that whatever you do, It's going to affect your neighbor here and abroad. Let's do the right thing. Let's treat people like we want to be treated. Black people not asking for the world. They're just asking for, let me have opportunities that white people or whoever, let me have the opportunity to complete. That's all we want. And
Well said.
we all have to work on this.
Mr. Steele?
My saying is, if you don't know your history, you repeat the history. Speaking of educational institutions now, they're trying to alleviate what happened in the past. So we as African Americans are not trying to make anyone feel guilty or feel bad about the past. We just want the truth to be told about the past. And by telling the truth about the past, then this would not happen again. There was one article where it was saying that the slaves came over here seeking employment. So they changed the entire history. Instead of saying they came as slaves, they're saying they came as seeking employment. So I just think that the story should be told, and it should be passed from generation to generation. You know, if you look at the Chinese race, they honor their history and they honor their elders and their ancestors. And so this history should be told so that it does not happen again. In Tuscaloosa, for some reason, we are not in competition with Bloody Sunday. But Bloody Tuesday happened before Bloody Sunday. More people got injured at Bloody Tuesday than Bloody Sunday. But Bloody Sunday is the one that's got all the attention, and everybody know about Bloody Sunday.
I think the total 94 arrested, over 3 dozen injured here.
Right. Yes.
Mr. Taylor, Council President Taylor, and I have talked about that often. At the 50th anniversary of Bloody Tuesday at the courthouse steps, I issued the apology for the city. We were wrong. Our police department was wrong. And I certainly say that again today, that we were wrong. And one of the things that's always captured me is in our Constitution, in the preamble of the nation's Constitution, it says, in order to form a more perfect union. Slavery was our original sin. And I think even our founders knew that.
Right.
That's why they said they knew time would have to lead us to make changes. The changes that you have made to make Tuscaloosa more perfect, we owe you a debt that we will never be able to repay. But on behalf of the city, thank you for who you are. Thank you for your courage. Again, my words are inadequate to meet the moment, but thank you. God bless you. And just know this, we are going to make certain this history is told, and we can put it anywhere and everywhere for our young people to learn from, and so they can have a better life than we've had. This has been a very special and moving edition of Tuscaloosa Talks.